You might get some fans with that accent after this podcast airs,
Really, it's just the same accent I had yesterday, but it's
the same one
it's
from 15 years ago.
exactly. It's the second I hear your accent now on my headphones, I immediately sound comparatively like Prince Charles, even though. Yeah.
My name is Shannon Reed. I've been a wrestling fan since the mid-1980s. I consider myself a casual historian. I'm also a professional wrestler. This podcast is dedicated to wrestling's glory days. I'm talking about the NWA, Mid-South Wrestling, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and more. Maybe you want to get extreme with ECW. Well, you can do it all right here on this podcast because we're going to have something for everybody. And yeah, we'll talk about modern wrestling as well. So tune in right here on Read This with Shannon Reed.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Read This with Shannon Reed, a classic wrestling podcast. Joining me today is a friend that I've known for a very long time, probably about 17, 16 years about this point. Michael Joshua Elliot. How you doing, Michael?
I'm doing really well, thank you. All the way from Western Europe, where it's quite hot this evening.
Yeah, it was interesting to set this up with the time frames. I did the podcast with Graham several weeks ago, and I didn't even consider the fact that he was in a different time zone. And so I'm sitting there on the couch just watching TV, not prepared at all. And he sends me a message saying that he's ready to roll, and I thought I had another hour. And yeah, so these time zones are kind of throwing me off a bit. And with you're in the UK, so it's what, a 7-hour difference?
A 6-hour difference for Central Time, so it's just before 1 a.m. here.
Gotcha.
And of course, Graham, you wouldn't have known because he's on Graham time anyway. He's whatever he's doing. Was he South Carolina? So he's Eastern time, right?
I think he's in Georgia now. I think he's okay. Like a reporter in Savannah, Georgia, because I always see it pop up on my news feed, and every time it says Savannah, it reminds me of a town I used to live in here in Missouri, of the same name. But yeah, I think he's in Georgia now. Okay. So we've known each other, like I said, many years, and this is the first time. I mean, we've always kept in touch on social media, but we really kind of met at those, Charlotte Fan Fests, and haven't seen each other in person in probably since the mid 2000s.
Yeah, I'm thinking like 2007 maybe. Were you there in 2007?
Yeah. It was Rockville, right?
I know Rockville's 2006 because I went in 2009, didn't go in 2008, but I don't think you were there then. No, gotcha. That was the last time that I went.
Gotcha. Wasn't there one time that you were supposed to come to a fan fest and you got stuck on a plane and just had to sit there?
Yeah, that was Rockville. Actually, there was a attempted terrorist attack at the airport, and so like just literally half an hour before I got there, and so like most of the flights were cancelled, and somehow just by a hand of God, like my flight went. It was like we had to board the plane. It was like on the plane for like 8 hours or something, waiting on the tarmac, waiting to take off, but got there in the end. But I think I remember getting there very late that evening, and then I had like a lot of waffles and felt really ill, and that's all I remember about the whole trip. But that's a theme throughout my life, definitely.
Right, waffles and forgetting things.
Exactly, yeah.
So today we got a kind of a fun topic that we're going to do. We've both recently rewatched ECW's first pay-per-view, Barely Legal, and we're going to do kind of a review today. We haven't compared any notes so far. So I kind of, I'll kind of get to my own experience with ECW and Barely Legal, but did you watch the pay-per-view when it originally aired, or how did you first see that event?
No, at the time in the UK, only WWF pay-per-views were. There was like no way of watching except for of WCW or ECW pay-per-views except by tape trading. WCW had like some of their pay-per-views coming out on home video, but not all of them. And it was really spotty. but ECW, I didn't see the show until I literally bought this videotape in, I think, 2000 or something. But I'd seen like one or two of the matches, like the triple threat. I'd seen the triple threat like on a tape, like a traded tape and stuff like that. But yeah, I hadn't seen it until 2000. Didn't watch it at the time, but was aware of the story and everything.
Nice. ECW was easily my favorite promotion of that era, like the Monday Night War era. And I wasn't able to watch the pay-per-view live because my cable provider didn't carry it. So I had to get a tape from a friend about a week or two later, unfortunately. And I'd been watching ECW for years, and I was stoked to see the pay-per-view, and not getting to was kind of a drag. But I eventually got to watch it, like I said, a week or two later. And when I rewatched it last night, I think it's the first time I have watched it since 1997. I probably watched it a couple times that year, but not since.
Yeah, I mean, I watched because at the time I got the TV. We had hardcore TVs on like the Bravo channel at like 1 a.m. But it was like 3 months behind or something. But I was already following like websites and newsletter stuff at the time. But I don't think I've seen it since about 2005.
Yeah,
I mean, that would be the most recent time that I've seen it.
Gotcha.
I think it was around the time of the One Night Stand. I wanted to go back and like WWE had the ECW DVD and stuff around that time.
Gotcha. Now, was this ECW One Night Stand or one of your one night stands?
No. Oh yeah, sorry. I have to be upfront about this. Yeah, that stuff is on the OnlyFans with the Joey Styles tape. Oh my god.
All right. So yeah, we're gonna jump into the show, and I kind of remember the background. ECW had for years had all these guys that went in there and worked really hard and killed themselves in front of several hundred people, sometimes 1,000 or so at the ECW arena, and this was a big deal for them to get on pay-per-view, and it wasn't easy. It was a battle. I know it was just about 5 months after the mass transit incident, which threw in some barriers from what I recall. I haven't researched this, but I remember that there was some detractors that didn't want them on pay-per-view, and that particular incident was something that was, hurting them and to some extent in getting that first pay-per-view show.
Yeah. I think if I recall correctly, something like they got on pay-per-view. They were in discussion about pay-per-view. And the pay-per-view was originally supposed to be in February '97 because it was going to be Terry Funk winning the title on the 20th anniversary of him losing to Harley Race. And after the mass transit incident, I think Wade Keller or something like that contacted the pay-per-view company, not to be a snitch, but more to like ask them about what do you think about this controversy. And that basically, in relation to that, I think something like half the cable systems dropped them. They're only available in about half the homes they would have been. Interestingly, one little anecdote that I went back and I read the preview in the Wrestling Observer of this, and I didn't know this. This show was actually, because it's presented as much as kind of like the company is riding on this show and it was kind of a success and everything. And in reality, it's even more of that because they, for what they were scaling to the number of buys they were scaling to get, they couldn't even break even on the show. They knew because of the cable homes. So what they were doing was basically if they put a good enough foot forward, which is why the show's a lot of the swearing and violence is a bit toned down. Like one of the cable companies wanted to like actually check the script before, like 2 months beforehand or something like that. And and so they knew that they were going to lose a lot of money on this, but they were just hedging. Heyman was just hedging that he would get other cable clearances if he kind of played ball and put across like a product that wasn't too offensive.
Gotcha. And I hopped on Wikipedia last night because when Masato Yakashiji came out, I wasn't sure how to spell his name because I had forgotten that he even substituted in one of the matches. And so I went to Wikipedia to see what his name was spelled, and I happened to look and I saw that the the buys on the pay-per-view, it did about 104,000 buys, which in some ways is really impressive because AEW gets touted for having, the best pay-per-view buys since, WCW went out of business as far as a non-WWE company. And they're just kind of over that 100,000 mark between, 105, 125, whatever it may be. And ECW did that despite being having less availability as far as being able to get the pay-per-view at the time. Granted, it was a hotter era in some ways, but still a pretty impressive buy rate.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I didn't bring the actual buy rate up because it isn't clear, because Meltzer reports in 97 very clearly that it gets 26,000 buys. But every other, all these other sources, like on the Wikipedia page, and and it isn't clear where it comes from. It says it got 100 or something thousand. Now, I would have thought that it would have been the case. But then again, in that era, that is like a kind of like, that's about what like some WCW shows were getting even in that era. So it could be a bit high, but I'm not sure.
That's interesting that Meltzer said 26,000. It sounds a bit low, but in some ways it wouldn't be, I guess, hugely shocking, just given the lack of availability. And, there wasn't a lot to go on because at that time, like whatever pay-per-view you're looking at that's non-WWF or WCW, it wasn't going to get a lot of buys. And so, yeah, I don't really know what the real number is then. I certainly trust Dave Meltzer more than Wikipedia. Maybe he had some kind of update later. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I went as far forward as I could see information about it, but yeah, it's very hard to search the Observer archives,
right,
with terms like that. But yeah, he had like at that point, it was early. It was quite early, about a month later, but he had some pretty detailed data at that time.
Gotcha. There's a lawnmower right outside my wall. Can you hear it picking up at all?
No. The benefit of having a cheap unidirectional microphone means that you can have quite a lot going on outside, and I probably won't hear it. And also, I've got tinnitus. Maybe it's really, really loud because I've been playing loud music since I was like 8 years old.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the show. April 13th, 1997. So the show starts with Joey Styles in the ring, and one thing I really feel about this moment, and I remembered it, was it just really felt like the minute you see Joey Styles in the arena and they're on pay-per-view, the crowd erupts, which isn't unusual, but it really felt at the time and when rewatching it that it felt like this is a victory for the small guys, for the underdogs. We've got our shot on pay-per-view, and it really felt like everyone was just so happy to see ECW have that moment. So when the camera started rolling, they just erupted.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy scene. It's somewhat reminiscent of, I guess, similar to the beginning of that WWE One Night Stand pay-per-view, the first one. And some, I guess, a modern example would be, with a similar feeling, would be if you saw the first All In and you got that pre-show and like the crowd's going wild because the thing is actually happening. And yeah, and this is totally, because at the time you presume that, oh, this could really, really be a thing because ECW puts out a better product.
Right.
In a lot of ways, a better in terms of the pro wrestling aspect, and a product that you knew at the time could appeal to the kind of audience that WCW and WWF were missing. Although WWF had already started doing the R-rated stuff at that point. Yeah, it was like crazy, and of course, all those fans with the kind of all the hype of the previous 3 or 4 years. It was kind of all culminating in that moment. And finally, it's kind of the beginning of, it's kind of like almost the end of the original ECW, in the sense that you go to like an ECW 2.0, which is like this pay-per-view years, like the last kind of 4 years or 3 or 4 years of the company, because the pay-per-view product is quite different because they lose going into that format a little bit of like the kind of I guess the cult-like atmosphere, because they're going, actually, okay, we've got to present a product, we've got to present a TV product, it's got to be like a 3-hour pay-per-view, and they're kind of Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to phrase that, but you know what I mean. It's kind of they tone back a kind of thing. It stops being. It's the end of like the super creative, like a lot of the super creative or really really out there stuff, and Heyman's kind of a bit bogged down with the stress of kind of like making these shows delivered and making the towns and trying to not piss people off and like keeping afloat with the ongoing. You know, he talks about it in I think the. I think one of the WWE documentaries that they did on ECW, he talks about how, you know, constantly because it took so long for the pay-per-view money to come in, and the pay-per-view money was and because the pay-per-views cost so much to put on, that was basically like a major concern. They never really got on good footing after that point because of that, even though obviously they actually did really stable business over the next, you know, certainly by like 2000, even with, you know, all the years of WWE and WWF and WCW like raiding them every time they built a new star, which is always an uphill battle.
Yeah, and I 100% agree about there was a rawness that ECW had before the pay-per-view era, and then once the pay-per-view era started, they were having to, you know, get their production values up, and they were, you know, they were being very careful who they put on the pay-per-views as well. And Barely Legal is a great example of that, because you got the Michinoku Pro 6-man that we'll get to, which is a bunch of guys that they had, you know, had a match in ECW the month before or a couple months before, and it got over really well. And I'm sure there were a lot of guys that were not as talented as they were, but had been with ECW for years and were probably a little bitter that they didn't get a spot on that pay-per-view. But this was ECW trying to appeal to a nationwide audience.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously there's no New Jack on the show, which is both completely understandable and kind of glaring, because he, you know, he was probably one of the character that was most representative of the kind of edgy aspect of ECW at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, coming on, as you say, like it was only 4 or 5 months after the Eric Coolers mass transit incident.
Yeah, it almost makes you feel like it was by design that he was not on the show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and jump into it. The first matchup, we got the ECW Tag Team Champions, the Dudley Boys, with Joel Gertner defending against the Eliminators. What were your thoughts on this matchup?
I mean, this match is just amazing. Like it's such a hype, and the crowd, obviously, the crowd are really into it. The Eliminators look. Particularly, I'm sorry, my mind is gone back. Yeah, Cronus looks pretty loaded in this match. I don't know if that's an offensive thing to say, but it's like he looks like, yeah, there's some stuff going on there. But my goodness, like both Saturn and Cronus, like they do just all these tremendous moves. That at that point, it's really unique to see. Actual heavyweight muscular water retented wrestlers doing, and you know, retaining some of that water in case Vince is watching, and my God, what's it like? Cronus does that 450, and it's in typical like ECW shambolic, really really hard hitting style. And he just lands really hard. It's like crying out loud. That's awesome, and they don't give. This is a showcase for the Eliminators. Like Heyman's literally looking, well, we've got a new kind of magnifying glass on the promotion. He wants to push the Eliminators as this kind of like, I know, cutting edge Midnight Express or something like that, extreme Midnight Express or whatever you want to call it. You know, with lots of innovative double team offense, and Saturn and the Saturn and Cronus, they just worked their butts off in this match. And obviously that's the story. The Dudleys are kind of like an afterthought. They don't get much at all.
I was amazed at how not only this match, but every match on the show, I had pretty much the same feeling about it watching it last night than I did in 1997. Like every match was exactly how I remembered it as far as like the quality of it. This match, the only thing is I remember this just being, like you said, a showcase for the Eliminators. I remember them just doing all their high spots and it not having any real psychology behind it. The Dudleys get like 5 moves right at the start, which, if anything, is a little more than I thought they got, looking back on it. But this is really just like, when people talk today about matches not having psychology, I mean, these dudes were just all 4 in the ring, and that's how ECW was.
They're arbitrarily not even bringing attention to tag rules not being enforced, but then sometimes they would do when they wanted to.
Right, and just in comparison to AEW, which gets a lot of flack for their issues with following the rules and things like that, ECW was like that times 10. Because just all 4 guys in the whole time. The Eliminators just showcasing all of the cool things they could do. It was not a long match. It probably went about 6 minutes, maybe 7. Cronus, super impressive athlete. When I remember, the Eliminators were always pushed as like the best tag team in the world, like you said. And that was something that Joey Styles always said on TV, that they're the best tag team in the world. And I think at the time, and I mentioned this when I did an ECW podcast a few weeks ago, the Eliminators, like as far as pure workers, like I think Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith were for sure like technically superior.
Yeah.
But as far as like excitement and just like balls to the wall action, if that's what you're looking for, the Eliminators really could have a case, at least in North America, for being, I wouldn't argue with anyone that voted them tag team of the year, because they were very exciting. They worked their butts off. They had a lot of cool shit they did. And who cares if they weren't the most polished workers? And Saturn was really good. And Cronus, I think Cronus was really effective when he was in the Eliminators, and struggled a little bit post Eliminators compared to Saturn. But yeah, what a talented team as far as the stuff they could do. No psychology. I thought it was interesting. There was a point in the match where a "fuck Sabu" chant like briefly broke out, and I have no I have no idea why.
I have that written down. I'm not quite sure what the hang on, one second. What else do I have on this one? Oh no, okay, no, yeah, that's fine. Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say you get the extra, you get 3 total eliminations in this one, because Sign Guy Dudley gets the total elimination, which is a fantastic move. They do it in like it's like a quintessential ECW finisher, like a move that people know, but it's just done really in a really stiff, or at least in a really stiff appearing fashion. And Joel Gertner gets one after the match, and Cronus nails him in the face. Like
he did.
It just kills the poor fellow.
Yeah, he really got him. And Gertner, he was like wincing. You could tell like he knew it was coming. And I thought 3 was a little excessive. I thought, since they got Sign Guy at the start and won the match with it, I thought when Gertner came back in and did his promo about how the Dudleys are still the champs, and I thought that was like a kind of a little overkill for them to get him with it too. But they they wanted to showcase the move and the team some more, so I get it. But
I mean, the three thing is very, very Heyman. I think, even to, I guess, like, without doing any spoilers for what we're going to talk about shortly, what is it? I think in the Shane Douglas Pitbull match, like there's part of working on Pitbull's neck. Shane Douglas hits 3 pile drivers, and Pitbull sells them less and less each time, and he kind of ends up selling the last one like he had, like, I know, like a snapmare or something like that.
I'm gonna have a lot to say about that match.
Yeah,
I also noticed that Joel Gertner, he really wasn't Joel Gertner yet. Like he didn't give one of his famous like double entendre intros, and maybe he hadn't really started doing that at the time as much. But
yeah, because he doesn't go away or something, and then comes back in like later on in like 98, and he's kind of got the gimmick more down at that point. I can't remember what happens to him. I seem to remember him not being there for a period of time.
Yeah. But this match, I gave all the matches star ratings just for the purpose of kind of evaluating them. And I gave this opening match 3.25 stars. Good opener, action packed. I like the match. Solid way to showcase the Eliminators, and I think a good way to start the pay-per-view.
Yeah, I mean, I gave it 4 on like the ECW pay-per-view scale, and 3.5 on the kind of like Smart board wrestling board 2005 rating scale.
Gotcha.
For this pay-per-view as an opener, it's perfect, and one of the like quintessential like pay-per-view openers of all time in terms of giving the crowd exactly what they want and starting off hot out the gate and not staying around for too long. So that one is 6 minutes 11 seconds, and the Eliminators win the World Tag Team Championships.
Right. So then we move on to the second match, which is Rob Van Dam replacing Chris Candido against Lance Storm.
Yeah, so this is playing off. Well, I guess it's like a bit of a real life thing, which then got turned into angle. This is probably the beginning of that angle here, where RVD is apparently going to go somewhere else, and so Chris Candido has a bicep injury. Comes out and says he'll be watching the 3-way, which is kind of misdirection, I guess, for what he does later on in the evening. And so again, you mentioned Gertner. Rob Van Dam here is like, he's not quite Rob Van Dam yet. He's got like the gimmick kind of 85% there, but you can tell, like going back and watching this, it's not quite there. And this is on the eve of him with his strange run on Monday Night Raw, is Mr. Monday Night with was it Jerry Lawler managing him or something, or being aligned with Jerry Lawler. And Storm is still rocking his bleached rat's tail, which is just tremendous.
I loved the rat tail, and I remember when he debuted in ECW. I was subscribing to the Torch at the time, and he debuted at the Arena against Balls Mahoney. And I remember when I read the Torch review of the match, it said that he was sporting a new, funky new breed style haircut, and I'm like, what? And so then when I watched the match, it's the same damn haircut he had in Smoky Mountain.
Oh right, yeah. Well, that's that's kind of false advertising on the Torch's part, because you want when you hear something like that, you want like a bit more of a mullet or something. But man,
yeah, absolutely. So I liked seeing Chris Candido. It's unfortunate that he got injured and was off the show. I remember that Rob Van Dam had a bit of a chip on his shoulder for real about the fact that he wasn't on the first pay-per-view like originally scheduled to be. And like you said, he wasn't really Rob Van Dam yet. He was getting there. One of the things that always was weird about ECW is they were so anti-establishment, but whenever someone like a Sid Vicious showed up, they went crazy for these guys. And when Rob went on Monday Night Raw with Jerry Lawler and started doing the Monday night thing, I feel like that's what really got him over with the ECW crowd. I mean, they always respected him and liked him, but I feel like they didn't really see him as like becoming the guy or close to the guy until he started doing that, which is weird because it's that WWF rub. But for whatever reason in the ECW universe, that helped.
Yeah, it's a pattern that you do see work on a number of occasions in wrestling, because it's like guy who isn't quite over yet coming up has to kind of like go into the abyss and kind of like get a heel heat to kind of find himself or something. I guess The Rock is vaguely similar, which is something happening around at the same time. Or even something like Roman Reigns now. I mean, Roman Reigns is over like Vince McMahon always wanted him to be. I don't know if you watch any WWE. I try to avoid it like the plague, but he really as forgettable and bizarre as that that 97 WWF run was for Rob Van Dam. That's really the thing that got him over. And of course, like the angle later in the evening, which kind of like slotted him more in the main event deal and got
Right.
heat on that angle. It was quite effective at getting heat on him, as well as the, you know, saying he's worth more elsewhere, and he's going to be on Monday night or whatever.
Right. So this match, Lance Storm, I had been a fan of his since Smoky Mountain, and he was always very talented, but I could see in this match that he was still kind of green in some ways. He wasn't as polished as he would become later on, and this match, I relatively enjoyed it. I thought it was a good match. I think that if they would have had a match 2 years later, or even 1 year later, I think it would have surpassed the level of this match. I gave this match 3 stars. Good match. First of all, and this was the case a lot on this show, the generic music replacements that they used for these guys, like, Rob Van Dam coming out to some, elevator music was just terrible. And there was a point where Rob Van Dam threw a chair at Storm's face, and Rob wasn't the most careful guy probably, but it really seemed to catch him pretty stiffly in the face. And another note I have is when Lance did his Rolling Boston Crab, and I don't recall him ever doing it before this match, but when he did it here, it definitely was not as smooth as it would look later on when he did that move.
Yeah, I think he if you ever listen to Lance Storm on podcasts, he talks about like how much he always likes to work safe, and he didn't like it when people did stuff excessively stiffly and unsafely, including in ECW, particularly in ECW. And I think this match is an example of that, in the sense that he feels uncomfortable. I think he feels like a little bit uncomfortable shooting, kind of like filling out RVD's style, which of course isn't completely solidified yet. And like he does those chair shots, and this chair shot is really, really weak. Everyone boos, and so he immediately gets that they're doing the chair shot. So he does another weak one for the hill heat, which I thought was really good. But yeah, like I think he's like uncomfortable getting in doing that stuff. A little bit like uncomfortable, unfamiliar with it, and doesn't quite know how he feels. And yeah, they're kind of like feeling each other out. And I think the match being put together pretty late, it doesn't really have much of a story going into it. And it just feels kind of like a good solid, we're going to fill this Gesundheit. We're just gonna fill this like spot with kind of like, again, like showcase 2 of these guys, get some of their stuff in. RVD's someone we're doing something with, so he goes over.
Yeah, and when Lance came to the ring, it really felt like, even though he had a reputation as being, a good talent, he didn't seem overly confident when he came out. He got a pretty nice reaction, but you could tell he was pretty unproven to the ECW crowd. Like they kind of knew him, they kind of knew he had some talent, but he wasn't over for sure, and that's fine because he just got there. The chair shots, that part is pretty funny where they boo him. But I understand, because like I was in a match a few years ago where I was in a street fight, and the way the match was going, I had to hit this guy in the head with a chair. Like the way he tried to swing it and I blocked it. It was like I had to hit him in the head, but I didn't want to because I don't like chair shots to the head. And so I gave them this kind of weak-ass Lance Storm style chair shot. And I know that's, it's better than just not do it at all. But for this match, I don't think it hurt it, because it was kind of funny in a way to hear the boos,
Yeah, it was kind of, in some ways, a difficult audience, but in other ways, it's kind of like a forgiving audience. So, like, they want to chant you fucked up, but at the same point, if you like try to cover it or turn it into something, they're kind of they're all for it. Yeah, I would have this match at about at 3 minutes 3 stars as well. Again, another quite short match. It's 10 minutes and 10 seconds.
Yeah. And there was a "you fucked up" chant when Rob did the springboard kick while he had Storm straddled on the ropes, and the crowd chanted "you fucked up." And I don't really miss those chants, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of stupid because it's the I guess when it's like a really, really major thing, like you're in an arena and they've sold something's going to happen, it doesn't happen, like perhaps a certain explosion. Like I think that's justified, but like putting extra it's the crowd, that thing with the crowd trying to get themselves over, but also it's like encouraging the wrestlers to kind of be a bit nervous about missing something, and they may like lay it in harder or something like that. Like there was another thing with the chair I've got down here. I completely forgot about that. RVD hits that drop kick with Lance kind of like guillotined over the chair a little bit, and that looks great. Again, it looks like it could be a bit stiff, but like, perhaps it's just what it would work that way. It's hard to tell on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Van Daminator at the end looked like the safest Van Daminator I've ever seen, because Lance kind of rolled with it instead of just taking the full blunt of it, which I don't blame him, because it didn't look bad, but he definitely kind of rolled with it and didn't just eat that chair shot.
Yeah, he kind of like slid the chair in time with the kick, and I thought, yeah, it looked good, and that's the way I prefer to see people take things like that. I mean, obviously, it's fun when people die in real life, not really die in real life, but in the wrestling sense of like they get really, really nailed. It was always fun to watch, and that's part of the charm of ECW. But like, you wouldn't ever like justify someone taking chair shots like that, and I don't really like watching it.
Yeah,
especially with what happens to like what's it like Mike Awesome and people like that afterwards, and have problems with depression and suicide and stuff from all their possibly related to all their concussions.
I mean, so many ECW guys passed away over the next 15 years, from either drugs or suicide, and there's a lot of pills in that locker room, but those chair shots. I know there wasn't a lot of research about CTE, but I also know that Lance Storm is an intelligent guy, and anybody could have told you that, there could be long-term ramifications. Now, we didn't know what CTE was, but it's common sense that if you're taking hard, full-on chair shots to the head routinely, like a Balls Mahoney or whatever, you're going to pay some consequences later.
Yeah, I mean, the CTE thing is like is kind of like a bit of a cop out, really, in the sense that they didn't understand that mechanism and know about like whatever the proteins in the brain cells or whatever. But it's obviously everyone knew that concussions and repeated blows to the head were bad news and had side effects, and so yeah. And obviously, as you say, someone like a Lance Storm, never took them for that reason.
Right. And he didn't want to give them out, which is, respectful, because if he didn't want to take him, but he was, drilling those guys. I mean, they probably would have preferred, honestly, Rob probably would have preferred that Lance laid in that chair shot, to be honest.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's what he's expecting. And that's like, I think part of the deal of the flow of like the ECW main event style in the pay-per-view era that would kind of like RVD would come to exemplify is that he has an opponent and they're kind of like comfortable enough with each other to kind of give and take those key kind of like quite stiff blows, like whenever there's a kick onto a chair or something involved, or throwing a chair at someone's head. There's very much part of the RVD and ECW main event style.
Right. I did kind of enjoy when Van Damme grabbed Bill Apter and started shoving him around. That was kind of funny.
Oh, I completely missed that. I don't know how I missed
it. It was quick. It was like about 10 seconds, but they were fighting out of the ring, and I think Van Damme may have done his like moonsault off the guardrail, and he just kind of grabbed Apter and just kind of shoved him out of the way. So it was really quick, and if you weren't watching closely at that moment, you would have completely missed it. So
I had the moonsault off the guardrail. I just missed the Apter spot. I now need to go back and watch it, because what's better than Bill Apter? Anytime Bill Apter's on the screen, you save money on OnlyFans.
So it sounds like we both liked the match. We both gave it 3 stars. But again, I do think that in 98 or 99, I think they would have had a better match for sure.
Absolutely. And that was, I guess that's one of the I guess like not sad, but like regrettable things about Lance Storm's run in ECW was that he didn't get many pay-per-view singles matches, and virtually none at his at the peak of his being over in kind of like 99 in the Impact Players era, because he was in the tag team. But that would have been an interesting a really good match, and like exactly as you say, a year or two later this would have been a much better match with a crowd that was much more receptive to it.
Right. So we'll go ahead and move on. Sounds like the pay-per-view is off to a good start. We both liked the first two matches, and so now it's on to match 3, which is the Michinoku Pro 6-man tag with the Great Sasuke, Gran Hamada, and Masato Yakashiji against Taka Michinoku, Men's Teo, also known as Terry Boy, and Dick Togo representing the BWO.
Exactly. And Joey Styles says Gran Hamada is 45 here, but he looks like he's 58 or something. He looks like, I said I had a comment about his mullet. He kind of looks like Tenru and Atsushi Onita kind of had a love child, and then they boiled it in tea or something, so it shrank. But yeah, I mean, this is like something that again, this is one of the things that ECW could do, and its version of what it'd been doing for the prior couple of years, doing on its first pay-per-view, which is showcasing something from a promotion wholesale and somewhat selflessly, in the sense of like, well, we're just going to showcase this match. We're not going to kind of like call them midgets or anything like that, or try to get them work a certain way. And yeah, and funnily, it's very quickly they couldn't really. It would come to pass that they couldn't be as effective as doing that, as essentially WCW started doing a similar thing, and even like, you know, just 2 months later, Taka Michinoku signs with the WWF and starts doing something like these kinds of matches on like a couple of pay-per-views, I think in like September, October of that year. But yeah, I mean, this match was great. It's somewhat tame in this style by modern standards, if you've seen a lot of modern wrestling, because this style really is the basis of, you know, when kind of like smaller heavyweights start doing this style, and with the influence of ROH, the kind of ubiquitous influence of ROH on the indies, and then, you know, obviously New Japan in the past decade, and, you know, heavyweights doing this kind of style, as much as juniors is like lots of fast, hard kind of like stiff moves. But at the time, like, this was really, really cutting edge. Takes a while, a little bit to get going, but the crowd really get into it. It's like a phenomenal match, I thought.
Yeah. And going back to your comment about Gran Hamada, he always did kind of look like Tenru, I thought, facially. And it's funny, I've always thought his body always reminded me of Tommy Rogers, where his legs were always kind of short, and he's kind of a short guy overall, but he's really athletic. Yeah, so Joey Styles said he was 45, and I thought he looked really freaking athletic in what he could do for being 45 years old. And Gran Hamada always seemed to look way older than he actually was, because even in the early 80s, when he was, you know, in his prime, he facially looked much older. Like, he never really looked like a young guy, I felt. Very, you know, underrated guy that not a lot of people speak of, and a guy that I've always been meaning to like watch more of, because every time I've seen him, he's impressed me with what he could do, especially over such a long time frame.
Yeah, he's a kind of like consummate, underrated wrestler, in the sense that, you know, he was always a really, really good worker, but probably because of his, you know, his look and kind of and I guess like charisma or something like that. He never really got kind of like got really, really big or significant pushes. I mean, this was a time when like the stratification of, you know, big and small wrestlers was just absolutely complete, and he was quite small even for a junior heavyweight working the Michinoku Pro style. He's quite small amongst these guys in the ring even.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I thought this match was great. I thought it was the best match on the show. I gave it 4.5 stars. So Bob Artiste, the ring announcer, first of all, kind of struggled a bit on the names. I noticed they kept calling Sasuke the Great Sasuke, which is understandable because I probably did the same thing when I got my J-Cup 94 tape and watched it with Japanese commentary, and I had only read his name before. So I didn't really know the proper pronunciation probably at that time. The substitution, Masato Yakashiji, I completely forgot there was a substitute in this match. Gran Naniwa was originally supposed to be the guy in the match. He did the crab gimmick. But I thought Yakashiji looked really good. Like, he got his ass kicked. He got to do some cool stuff. He actually reminded me of Kikuchi, who was a guy that wrestled in All Japan in the early 90s, especially. Was a memorable guy that he always got his ass killed. But he was easy to root for as an underdog, but he would take a lot of punishment. And that's who Yakashiji reminded me of watching him here. And I have no idea what became of him. I don't know what he went on to, but he certainly looked like a guy with some promise.
Yeah, I also completely forgot that there was a substitute for Gran Naniwa. Yeah, Masato Yakashiji. I had to look up how to spell the name as well. I thought, yeah, there's like a Hamada hits. I put this out in my notes. Like, I was really interested because I sometimes like intricacies, and like Hamada nails Terry Boy with like this excellent headbutt, and it was like one of those like really, really good working headbutts where it looks super like snug, but it's like totally safe kind of thing.
Yeah, it was. I remember it too. It was right at the beginning of the match, like first few minutes.
So the only thing that was that the crowd tries to shit on a little bit, the only opportunity to get there's that slightly botched triple power bomb, which gets the "you fucked up" chant. But that's Sasuke hits the wild moonsault from the second rope into the crowd, and he gets an ECW chant, and like from that point, they're like totally with the match.
Yeah, I loved that. I thought it was weird that there was a point where Taka Michinoku flips the bird, and they, at least the version that I watched, which is from the WWE Network, the original WWE Network, they blurted out him flipping the bird, but yet so many fans were doing that throughout the show, like right in front of the camera, especially at the beginning during Joey Styles' introduction. I just thought that was kind of weird. Yeah,
it's like kind of completely arbitrary, and they're doing lots of clearly audible like FUCK type chants, and it's I don't remember, was that because I know obviously usually on ECW things like that wouldn't have been blurred, but maybe that was on the pay-per-view. I can't remember.
I think it was a WWE Network thing. Yeah. I also completely forgot about the fact that the Taka, Terry Boy, Dick Togo trio did the BWO gimmick.
Yeah, BWO Japan. They were also already known as Kai Entai as a 3-man team in Michinoku Pro at the time. But yeah, I completely. It's a little bit superfluous, but I guess it's one of those Heyman touches to kind of, give dog and pony show booking, give a kind of like an extra bit of rub to some people that might not be familiar with it. And yeah, in some ways, this match is like a kind of the thing that I immediately thought of is like you remember in ROH in kind of 2000, I think it was 2006, the WrestleMania weekend show, they had the famous Dragon Gate 6-man, which was like I think Wrestling Observer Match of the Year, and obviously that was a lot. By that point, things had become a lot more bifurcated, and it was and that kind of style. It was like smaller wrestlers doing much more complicated stuff, completely incredulous, and like not really any kayfabe to it. It's kind of like people are kind of reacting to the spots and how they didn't see the spots coming and stuff. But this was somewhat of a kind of, I guess, a precursor to that mentality. You know, Northeast wrestling crowd, a smart wrestling crowd, getting something from another company and like respectfully allowing them to showcase it. Early on, before they really got into the match, there was actually a few USA chants, which is I thought was interesting. But I
didn't even notice that.
They were like, what I sensed from this crowd was that they weren't. I think I actually had it written here. Yeah, they were first they were respectful as opposed to being like educated. They kind of like understood, like maybe like, you know, maybe only 30%, 40% of the crowd kind of like were really familiar with what was happening, but everyone knew that, kind of like had trust in the promotion. Oh, we're getting some good stuff from around the world, and we've got to like we're going to give them a chance, kind of thing.
Yeah, it you know, it's another one of those matches that ECW would do, and you kind of touched on this earlier, where they would bring guys from the outside and just kind of showcase them. And I remember to this day the feeling that I had when I watched Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Psychosis at the ECW Arena, September of '95, and it just blew me away. Like I had seen like them in the magazines, and I'd seen I think by that point I may have seen the When Worlds Collide pay-per-view tape. But that match was awesome, and they just brought them in cold, and they tore the house down. And this was another example. They brought these guys in because they were tearing the house down in Japan, and they wanted to have a killer match on the pay-per-view, and I think they succeeded.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up the famous Mysterio versus Psychosis match from like '95, and that's like a really good example. I think like generally this is something that's a feather in Heyman's cap, because he didn't have the money to sign people, and politically, like, it was dubious using people wrestlers from other promotions or who may have had cachet elsewhere. So what he would do is basically use that to his advantage. Say, hey, I'm just going to showcase these guys, let them go. I know this guy's going somewhere elsewhere, or he's with another promotion, and we can't like use him for a long period of time. And so he did that with everyone who would come through there, and sometimes to his detriment, as you said, like, you know, every time it got to a point where every time they'd bring a kind of like, you know, Brackus or, you know, Sid Vicious type thing, or even Rick Rude. I mean, it's hard to turn down Rick Rude, but of course he knew like there's probably not going to be an opportunity to do long-term booking with Rick Rude. But he was the only one of a so-called major promotion that was willing to do that, to use something for the kind of either the novelty or for the creative benefits, to add value to the fans, to make the show good, in knowing that he may not have it there tomorrow. You know, by design, literally anything that they do that's good, you know, the two other companies are watching. Very few people. I mean, RVD might be the only one, and Raven going back in '99, who actually like chose to stay when they could have got more money elsewhere for less creative freedom and a kind of unknown outcome.
Right. Another thing I'll say about this match is, you know, Taka Michinoku was really good, and it's just in this match he was just a lot of fun to watch. And then, like you said, a couple months later he signs with the WWF. I remember they had him and Great Sasuke at the Canadian Stampede do a singles match, and Taka, even though Sasuke went over in that match and the next night on Raw, Taka actually got over more in the match and with The Office. And so they kept him, and it just, you know, I never got that same feel from Taka again. Like, watching him feud with Brian Christopher, and Brian Christopher was a good wrestler, but when you're watching a young Japanese high flyer like Taka Michinoku, it's not the ideal opponent for him. But in the WWE world, they're trying to figure out this whole light heavyweight thing that got over so well in WCW. But Taka, like, his WWF run just didn't do it for me at all. And it's really too bad, because he was a very talented guy.
Yeah, I seem to recall he has like, I think, 2 pay-per-view matches with Brian Christopher, and the first one, which I think is in September of '97, is like quite good. Like Christopher's quite a good bass, and they have a kind of a bit of chemistry. And how I remember it is like low key. It was a bit like the kind of Pillman Liger at the '92 Super Bowl, in the sense that kind of like to the audience, it kind of like got over a bit, and you could see that it was like I guess a little steam in like pushing that belt. But it was like classic WWF. Like obviously, it's not something that they're comfortable with, and they kind of dropped it. And Taka Michinoku never recovered from that first round of going through kind of WWF booking, of being kind of like tossed to the wolves, of being or a toilet break segment kind of thing.
Yeah, like they'd always bring out Sonny as ring announcer whenever it was time for like a Taka match, because they wanted to keep the audience, because like he was not presented as a guy that people wanted to see. And not just Taka, but a lot of their guys, like light heavyweight style wrestlers. I remember he had a match with Pantera that was pretty good at one of the like in your house type shows. But it just didn't do it for me in the WWF, because it just, like a lot of guys, just didn't fit there. But man, he was really good in this match. Gran Amata was great. I always love watching Sasuke, in action. Terry Boy, I've seen him less than most of the others, but he held his own too. He was pretty solid in everything he did. And Dick Togo, I mean, he's still around to this day in New Japan. I mean, he's not, doing the ring work that he used to do, but he's a fixture. And so as I mentioned, I gave it 4.5 stars. Thought it was the best match on the show. What did you give it as far as a star rating?
I go with 4.5 as well. Yeah, definitely.
All right,
4.5 stars. And one thing, just to one other kind of anecdote, something I thought of. We might talk about like Gran Hamada being 45, and it's like. And by the standards of that time, that was like old, and you used to wrestle, and that being an older wrestler. But it's funny, isn't it? By the standards of of today, people generally in society appear to not be kind of like not age as quickly, but particularly in wrestling, like every company's kind of main event scene is skews kind of like towards 40. So 45 would not be, that's what Randy Orton's somewhere around there, isn't he? He's in his early 40s.
It's funny because I was thinking that exact same thing when I watched the match last night. I'm like, he's 45, and I'm like, for that era, like I don't recall a lot of guys, if any, that were 45 that were still the athlete that he was and able to go at that level. But today, it's more commonplace that you have these guys that are in their mid 40s or even early 50s, like a Minoru Suzuki, that are still able to have these killer matches and look as good as they did when they were younger. But back then, if you were 45, like you were pretty over the hill in a lot of senses. And there's some exceptions, but I don't recall seeing too many guys look as good as Gran Amata at age 45.
Yeah. Do you have any insight as to what the change is? Is it something to do with the style? Is it something to do with like the lifestyle?
The only thing I could think of is that the evolution of, potentially better nutrition, smarter athletes on how they are utilizing their body, less travel, like that's probably a big one. People aren't working as often. So, back then people were working hundreds of days a year, and now they don't have to. So that could be a part of it as well. But I think just in general, like the evolution of the athlete and what they're able to do. And there's also pharmaceuticals, there's testosterone injections, there's, whatever it can be. And so like, Christian Cage, is, or Edge, like they're both performing strong and they're in their mid to late 40s. But yeah, you just didn't see a lot back then. So I don't really know, other than perhaps better athletes through evolution, smarter about nutrition, less travel, and some combination of all that stuff.
Yeah, because the paradox there is kind of that this also happens as in this kind of from the last, say, 24, 25 years post from Attitude Era on, which is when like the style universally kind of like we're in this kind of post, early ROH kind of era where that kind of style basically influenced all of wrestling. And there's like a lot more bumps. From the mid to late 90s on, there's matches have a lot more bumps. There's a lot higher athleticism generally expected at a certain level. Fans expect a kind of certain level of athleticism, at least on major league stages, and particularly in like the last 5 to 10 years, that's like a quite implicit thing. It's like quite hard to get to use smoke and mirrors to get someone who isn't like a really good athlete over. And it's weird because you would think that perhaps that style, as we always hear about, like all the, Will Ospreay taking all the bumps and everything, and it obviously is kind of a bleeding edge example because he is getting injured. But generally, as a net thing, you get like obviously people tearing biceps and things like that, but you tend to get this longevity of people. You brought up Christian and Edge, and like that's an example. Like, obviously Edge does look a bit old, and I think that's been a bit of a detriment, particularly with his hair and stuff. But like Christian, obviously we know he's older. I mean, he's in whatever, he's 48 years old. But it's kind of like not particularly a notable part of the deal that he's like really old. I mean, it is a change, and it's very interesting, and very interesting to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of guys that were really talented back in the old days that were kind of washed up by the time they were 35, 36, 37.
Yeah, and like generally promotions would see them as that. And like I remember I first saw Flair in kind of 88, and I thought that Flair, because I'd come from watching WWF and I'd seen Hogan first, and it's that classic thing. I thought these like Flair, like that's ridiculous. He looks really old, and like of course, like within 3 months that was gone. And I thought Flair was like the best thing ever, and like and didn't really think that way. But it's weird. I can kind of see the prism through which the industry saw things like that, particularly in the WWF when they were really, really hyper focused on the image. And Vince, as early as 86, was kind of looking at trying to replace Hogan because he was getting older and he was balding more and stuff like that. But yeah, it's really interesting. They appear, all three of the major companies appear to be really happy having guys over 50 regularly in the main event spot, and they appear to mostly like be able to hang. Right.
Yeah, it's certainly a positive, I'd say. Guys like Dustin Rhodes and Minoru Suzuki and those guys. So we'll go ahead and move on to our match number 4 of the evening, which is Shane Douglas versus Pitbull number 2 in a grudge match stemming from when Shane Douglas broke Pitbull 1 Gary Wolf's neck. And this was kind of the culmination of a feud that had been going on for several months. What were your thoughts on this match?
Firstly, like they do that little bit of a recap at some point in the show where you see it's like quintessential like classic ECW over the top angle when like Gary Wolf has the halo on his head and kind of Shane Douglas pulls him over by the halo. I thought that's absolutely wild. This match, it's like what they laid out in the story they were trying to tell was like great, and it had a kind of like nice enough combination of like that kind of like hard hitting kind of offense, and I could see how it would work in a match. But for some reason, they were just kind of in slow motion, and they started to lose the crowd, and they never really got it back. And you get that bit where Pitbull number 2 gets the guardrail in the ring, and like I think Shane's trying to either crotch him on it or do the Flair knee drop onto it, and kind of kicks it over, and they botched the spot a bit. And there are a couple of things like that. They're kind of like it seems like I think like Pitbull comes out the gate like really fast. I think he just gets blown up quite quickly or something like that. So I mean, it's hard to gauge exactly what happened, but yeah, they kind of like lose it, and then they're kind of like just the step behind for like the rest of the match, even though the stuff I completely see from the layout of the match is kind of like, oh yeah, like this part, it kind of like it works like it works on paper. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, first of all, like I remember watching some of their matches prior to this, and I thought it was a pretty good feud, and I thought they were working well together, like building up to this match. And I don't know how much of that was Paul Heyman's editing, because they didn't always show like the complete matches. But I remember thinking that, it was a pretty good feud, I thought. And so one thing I'll say is that the generic music that they overdubbed, like there's no better example than this match, I think, where Shane Douglas would always come out to Perfect Strangers, and Pitbull too would come out to White Zombie, and here it's just like generic bullshit music, and it just it blows. Like, it's just, I wish they would pay for the song rights, but I get it. I thought this match just fucking blew. I thought it was terrible. They started off in a logical way with Pitbull trying to work over Shane's neck. But Pitbull was so like methodical, showed no intensity. Like you said, he was blown up quickly. I always thought that Pitbull too, like really in '96 had like kind of come into his own, and he was impressing me with some of his matches and things he could do. But here he just seemed like a roided up, blown up dude that was having to be carried, and Shane was pretty big at this point. Like he was, Shane was always a good wrestler, but here he was carrying the match, but he himself was pretty big, and it wasn't the ideal opponent for him to really look good against, I felt. And yeah, just, it had not only the botch spots, which is I'm pretty forgiving about usually, but this was a methodical match with a lot of garbage, and it didn't flow. It had no heat. And then just the psychology of Francine handing Shane an object to use, like on the down low behind the ref's back, after they've already used a fucking guardrail and all this other shit. Like,
the guardrail's been in ring legally in play in the match.
Right, but she hands him the chain on the sly, and Joey Styles is trying to sell it like, like this is like some big devious move. But that's the problem with what ECW was, is there was no rules. So when you tried to go that route, it just didn't work. In this match, it didn't do it for me. It went like over 20 minutes, and
it was like way too long.
Yeah, like I would have given it 8 to 10, and I like the fact that it had a clean finish with Shane hitting the belly to belly, but I just hated the match. And I will say that I didn't remember at all the part where Brian Lee comes out as a babyface and kisses Francine. Like, I didn't remember that at all. And I remember the Rick Rude thing, but I didn't remember that he came out like unmasked at this show. So that was, kind of
I remembered like Rude dressed as the right in the right gear and and then taking the helmet off, but I didn't remember that it was at this show, and I didn't think it was there. But yeah,
I remember
it's quite a well done angle. I mean, that kind of saved the match because the crowd really in that angle and into that angle at the end, and then Brian Lee giving him the choke slam. They really popped for that and almost saved the match.
I like the angle at the end way better than the match, and I gave the match a 0.5 star, in which really, the effort was there, but the execution was not. It really was the low point of the show for me by far, and that 0.5 star was maybe a bit generous on my part. How about you?
I'll give it a star. Like I think, not to say that it was good. I mean, in some ways, I'm just sticking with what I said at the time, and that's because when you said 0.5 star, I'm gonna get on the bandwagon here. This is a good rating to give this match, but I'm gonna stick with the star. I think, we talked about this kind of being like some aspects of ECW losing its edge at this point, and it kind of like you can roughly demarcate it as being with the beginning of their pay-per-view era. And this is one of those things, because you go into it believing that, okay, in particular, the franchise is like one of the guys who is something that you can't get elsewhere, and he's just as good, and he's going to give you a kind of like, he's like the Ric Flair and Steve Austin or whatever, but it's a gimmick that you can't see anywhere else. And then it's kind of like live on TV, perhaps without editing, or perhaps just being unlucky, like And this is a thing that I think because is repeated throughout, like Shane Douglas being on ECW pay-per-view as a kind of top guy. He just plays this role, which is almost very similar to kind of like what Triple H would do like 3 years later, in terms of like the muscled up kind of like, you know, top arrogant heel kind of thing. That's supposed to be really muscular, really dominant, but he just never really delivered in the ring. And of course, not to like this degree. Obviously, there were probably just fundamental problems with the design of the match, and the guy gets blown up or whatever. But yeah, this was a stinker, kind of saved by the in people's memories by the angle at the end.
Yeah, and I think I did a ECW MVP episode a few weeks ago where we ranked the top 15 MVPs in our mind in ECW history, and I had Shane at number 4. But I will say I thought he was a great promo. He had great presence. I thought he came off as a main event guy, and I thought he was a good wrestler. But did I ever watch an ECW show where when it was over, I was like, you know, that Shane Douglas match was the best match on that show? I remember a lot of times being kind of underwhelmed by his matches. I remember him and Al Snow had a match at WrestlePalooza that kind of was underwhelming. And like when I think of like classic matches, like a lot do not come to mind with him. And
I mean, the only guaranteed one would probably be the night the line was crossed, and that's kind of like because of the historical aspect of it and the novel aspect of the three-way dance at the time.
Yeah, and so his matches were just not quite the level of some other guys, but you know, good wrestler. And I hate to trash him a bit because I do think that he was very good in his ways. But yeah, this was the low point of the show for sure.
Yeah, I definitely believed in Shane Douglas at the time and thought that this was one of, I guess, somewhat like what RVD ended up actually being, is like something in the main event of ECW that you couldn't get somewhere else. I believe that he was like a guy, like a kind of Steve Austin, who couldn't get much love elsewhere, and he kind of like had to show what he could do. And he kind of had a great look as well, like with that, you know, retaining a lot of water as he is here, but he looks really, really great. He hasn't gone too bald yet. But yeah, it's like it's a match that would get shit on today in like front of 40 people at an indie show.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and move on to match number 5, and what was really kind of the unofficial main event, I'd say, of this show. Maybe the most anticipated match for sure, which was the long-awaited grudge match between Sabu and Taz.
Yeah, this has been it's been making for like a year or something. It seems something like that, building up to this. And they showed like, yeah, they're really, Heyman's really pushing Taz here as like this big kind of like crossover MMA-ish kind of shooter type wrestler with the suplexes and everything. They show in that the promo beforehand, they show him like choking out Jericho and Paul Verlins and Van Damme, and he says, I have no choice, Sabu, I'm going to choke you," which I thought was a really, really good line. And yeah, I mean, this is really does, they bill it as kind of one of the main events, and it is like kind of like de facto, yeah, the main event, and the crowd really has that kind of, you know, big fight feel or whatever, you know, is in the modern nomenclature. Interestingly, Bob Ortiz announces this as, he said, what's that tagline? I've got it written down here. Yeah, the grudge match of the century. And you notice when he says that, because people don't need the match to be sold to them, but then he says that, and there's quite a substantial proportion of the crowd are booing, and it kind of feels like coming off that last match, they weren't quite into it. They weren't exactly blown away by the whole thing. They don't want to be, they're not in the mood to be kind of like oversold and under-delivered on something. So it kind of like, I felt it like put the match off on a bit of a bad footing. It's a strange thing to say. It was a strange thing to say because already it doesn't need overhyping. It speaks for itself. They've seen, you know, the prior year and what the match means to them. And these are the two of their top guys.
Yeah. I agree. It was a very anticipated match. It was something a lot of people look forward to, including me. But when you say it's the grudge match of the century, it is a bit of an oversell in the sense that, like, for example, on Twitter the other day, I just made a random tweet that in my opinion, my unpopular opinion, the best match ever at Starrcade was the Rock and Roll Express against Ole and Arn Anderson in a cage. And I said this because I'm a big fan of the match, and I don't hear a lot of people talk about it in the same terms as, say, the I Quit match. Well, one of my friends was like, he's like, I'm going to watch it now and get back to you about what I think, and I'm like, and I responded, I'm like, well, now that I've said that, I've given it these, I've said this statement that it's never going to live up to now. If you've never seen the match, you're going to go into it watching it now that I've said that, and it's probably not going to be living up to what, I've hyped it as. But to me, it's the best Starrcade match. So what that long, convoluted, messy story is supposed to represent is the fact that Sabu and Taz didn't need to be sold. Like you said, it was, to some people, it was the biggest grudge match, but that was a select amount of people. And then there's going to be the people that are shitting on that as being said as a statement, and they should have just left that part out,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is generally a very good example of when you really push something as a certain thing, and it's quite abstract as to whether it is or not. And like, for example, that cage match, you kind of like people, you're really inviting people to kind of, they almost kind of like want to say, well, I want to kind of like watch this, and they're going to watch it with a hypercritical eye, and they're going to say, and whatever. But in the abstract, it kind of like it makes sense. But yeah, I didn't know why they did that. But anyway, let's move on here. So this match, I thought that this match is like fantastic. You get Taz defeats Sabu in 17 minutes 49 seconds with the Taz mission. And I mean, there are moments in the match. It's very much a microcosm of Sabu ECW matches, and there's like some sloppy stuff, some missed stuff. There's the bit at the angle at the end where he kind of like completely kills the triple jump dive onto the table with Taz on the outside, and like he goes for it again, he messes up second time, and then just falls at this really dangerous angle. So it's like not perfect, and there are times when you can see the crowd is deflated a little bit by things that don't go very well. But it's like there's so many like high points in the match. It tells the story perfectly. I love the way it kind of like comes out of the gate with Taz doing all the submissions, and kind of like he busts I think he looks like he busts Sabu open for real with one of those forearms, and like kind of putting over that he really, really is dangerous, and like Sabu's kind of like, got to be on the defense. And then it just has all of the kind of like the high points that you would expect, like the crazy triple jump, the jump off the chair thing, off the ropes into the crowd, and like there's that finish where wasn't Sabu hits the Tazplex and like tries to signals that he's going to go for the Taz mission, but then like Taz gets him from behind with the suplex and then the Taz mission, and that's the finish. I give this one, I think this is like a 4 stars, but like on the ECW pay-per-view scale, it's like 4 3/4 stars.
All right. Looking at my notes, I noticed that when Team Taz came out, Danny Doring was one of the Team Taz members, and this would have been obviously before he had debuted in ECW. I liked the match a lot. I thought it was very good. I liked how Taz, because the other thing that was interesting in the build for this match is Sabu didn't do jobs. Like he didn't do jobs, and Taz had been built up as indestructible. Like he had been beating guys in 5 or 6 minutes in pretty dominant fashion, and And so there was that feeling of what's going to happen because Taz is running through guys and Sabu doesn't do jobs, and you weren't really sure how this was going to go, and Taz getting the win I thought was a positive, and I really liked the angle at the end in some aspects. I liked how Taz it felt very, very real the way he was doing the submissions and wrestling Sabu. Like he would double leg him and he would get him in kind of these like hybrid UFC type positions that that were kind of interesting to watch, and especially for that time in that era. And Sabu just kind of being out wrestled, and then he would rely on his high flying and craziness, and it was a competitive match, but you still had Taz kind of looking the stronger of the two throughout the match. So Sabu was kind of fighting from underneath for a lot of it. I thought the match was very good. I gave it 3 3/4 stars. I thought Sabu passed out pretty quickly from the Taz mission. Like he was out almost immediately, which I guess in some ways may be more realistic, but it's not in a professional wrestling sense. You're not used to people passing out so quickly.
Yeah, and in the context of how he's been competitive when receiving the kind of punishment he's received in the match, it doesn't make much sense. On paper, it makes sense, as you say. Like in reality, it makes sense. But in the context of the match, it's more, it's a little bit one of those kind of like, we're going to do the finish now kind of feeling things.
Yeah, and there was another spot where I don't remember what happened, but Joey Styles said that Sabu's nose is broken for sure, no doubt about it, and the camera was focused on the nose and it looked absolutely fine. So I think Joey maybe could have left that line out because the intensity was already there, and you don't need to oversell some things to kind of get these guys over.
Exactly. I hate when do that. And JR does that quite often at the moment, like on like modern AEW. And it's like I really don't like doing that. What do you say? You don't want to get that thing where someone's watching and they immediately think, well, hang on, you're overselling that and you're full of shit. There's blood there and it's spectacular, and it's already like, well, you may have injured his nose or something like that. There's enough to say like there's enough there. He's bleeding. You may have injured the nose, but yeah, it's kind of an oversell. Now one interesting thing about this match, because we'll talk about the angle at the end, which is RVD and Sabu essentially joining forces with Bill Alfonso, and Fonzie kind of turns on Sabu. This is really, really strange because in the match, like Alfonso starts foreshadowing this, but it's kind of like in the sense of Sabu is being really, really resilient, and so he kind of like about halfway through the match, he starts to kind of like subtly kind of like, well, I mean, act like, oh, this guy's being so resilient. I'm loving like the heart and the whole thing. It's one of those things. It doesn't quite make sense because obviously he had the T-shirt on underneath. That's what they were planning to do the whole time, and it's like, why didn't they do it earlier? Or like it doesn't quite. It's one of the things that doesn't quite make any sense, but it works because it's the swerve, and you haven't seen that kind of thing like 110 times.
I didn't even notice the subtle hints throughout, and I had forgotten about the double turn afterward. And I thought the double turn angle was great, except when they tried to do those spots on the outside, and they looked like absolute shit when Sabu slipped and then the table collapsed, and that's a bad time to botch when you're trying to do a big angle like that. I don't remember too many botches during the match, but that definitely felt kind of flat when you're just doing a major heel turn like that.
Yeah, it was one of these things where so it's like they play first when like I think Taz is going to attack RBD, who is no-selling RBD, hitting him from behind, and then they play for a second that because they've just said, Sabu and Taz have just kind of like shaken hands in the ring, said they respect each other or whatever. And so like Sabu plays like, oh, I don't want to do this, I respect the guy, but then he just like goes, oh, what the hell, goes full hill. And again, that's another part which doesn't much make sense. But it's one of those things where it was enough to do the turn and the beat down. It was like a bit too much to have like 2 minutes of doing spots or something. It just seemed they kind of like took it a little bit past the point where there was the point where there was like maximum heat, and of course like it's hard to recover from like the botch ball that ended up being like quite a bit of a crazy fall through the table. But yeah, like RBD did the Monday night promo, and like the whole thing with Fonzie, like it ended up getting over quite well, even though the angle itself kind of like went on perhaps a little bit too long.
Yeah. So we'll move on to match number 6, which is the 3-way dance to determine who will challenge Raven later in the night. This is Big Stevie Cool, Stevie Richards versus the Sandman versus Terry Funk.
Now, you have the Blue World Order out with Big Stevie Cool, and was that Rob Feinstein?
Yeah, 7-Eleven. Yeah.
I completely forgot that he was out there. That's mad. And so he's out there with Nova and the Blue Meanie. And
I was trying to remember who the Thomas, the Inchworm, Rodimer. Like I remember the gimmick, but I can't remember who the guy was doing it.
Yeah, I had no memory of who it was. I saw him and then vaguely remembered it, and then when he came on the screen, I was expecting to recognize who it was, and I didn't. I have no recollection of who that is. And here you talk about the generic, because I watched it on the WWE Network as well, which we still have here in Western Europe, is there's no Peacock, which might get beeped out later. And that generic music was crazy, because one of the problems with the generic music isn't that you just get the generic music, it's that they have to cut out obviously the arena noise, and so the crowd noise, and it just kills these all of these entrances. But in particular the Sandman, you can just see that this crowd is like teaming, like off the walls, like singing along with like Enter Sandman, and it's just like some generic rock music and some generic like Monday Night Raw kind of crowd noise, like ha ha, like smiles on faces. And it's like you're watching the match inside Vince McMahon's brain. And wow, like Terry Funk, like the music that they gave him, it's like, I know, like 1986, like local Kansas City weather report or something. Music.
I'm pretty sure that he came out to Desperado by the Eagles on the actual pay-per-view, because that had been kind of his theme, like the kind of sentimental theme, and I remember it. And this did not give you that sentimental feel at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Now, this match, again, it's the big story of like, can the beloved aging hardcore legend overcome his age and adversity to win one final like title match? As I said, it according to the Observer, it was originally planned to be a few months earlier than this. Interestingly, this is like this angle, which was designed by Heyman like lovingly to be this kind of big thing for Terry Funk, with this great story which ends up with him getting the championship. I seem to recall that it was kind of it wasn't received in the way that that you might expect, in the sense of the ECW fans kind of wanted Funk to be this kind of like badass hardcore legend, and they went a little bit too far in the wins that he had leading up to this, with him doing similar to what the Flair retirement in WWE in 2008, where the fans would have just liked to see him, see the guy like get over and kind of enjoy the guy being dominant. But they went a little bit too hard on like every guy like beats him, and you get really beats him down, and you get the sympathy thing, a sympathy vote, and he just about wins, and that plays into the finish of the match as well, which was like, again, it's one of those ECW, it's like great overbooked Heyman finishes, and it does work, but it's kind of like that story, and it's not really the story that I feel that those fans wanted to see. Now, as for the 3-way itself, the first portion of the match, it's like it's very, very, very ECW in the sense of like there's lots of stuff that's either like really blown or really like dangerous. Like the Sandman brings the ladder in and throws it hits Funk in the face, does the same with the trash can as the Funk takes the really, really bad looking moonsault off the ladder. Well, the moonsault looks good, but he kind of like completely misses, or Stevie doesn't catch him. The story they basically tell at the end is like they decide Funk and Sandman basically decide to kind of like, well, hang on, we've got to eliminate one guy before we can win. Let's kind of like gang up on the guy, and so they do a double power bomb and pin Stevie.
Yeah. I'm looking at my notes, and my first note that I wrote down from the match is Sandman still cool as fuck.
Yeah, he's really, really cool. And like the aspect, because he was so, his deal was so that he was like kind of like this, a kind of non-wrestler, right? Completely untraditional for a pro wrestler in the sense of you're going to get the atmosphere and the intro, but he's going to be in the match with the beer and the cigarette and kind of like looking like he's like, he's just finished watching like David Letterman or something. And he's just like, had a shower and is about to go to bed, and he's come out to wrestle a match because he's really drunk or something. This is there's that couple of what was the spot? There was the ladder. They do the ladder seesaw thing. They do it a couple of times, in the ring and once to the outside. And one towards the end of the first portion of the match, like Sandman jumps off the top and so the ladder hits Steve Richards, and he hits the ladder really hard, and it goes flying into the crowd. It's tremendous, but it's one of those like classic ECW kind of like you got away without a lawsuit, like just by a slither.
Yeah, I thought it added to the excitement, but yeah, definitely very risky. This what you said about the entrance music was spot on, and the only point in this whole show where I skipped forward a little bit was during Sandman's entrance, when it was this generic music and he's looking cool as fuck, but it's like a 10-minute entrance and it's not Enter Sandman. You can't hear the crowd, and I just couldn't take it anymore. So I hit the skip button until the next guy came out. So yeah, the music is just so butchered. I really liked the match. I thought that, especially considering that, in 1997, ladder matches were around for sure, but they weren't the staple that they would go on to be. And it's funny because I remembered the use of the ladder so much in this match that without putting a lot of thought into it, I kind of thought this was a damn ladder match. And then when I watched it, I realized it was just a three-way dance where they incorporated the ladder, because I remembered the Funk moonsault, and nobody ever catches Terry Funk on a fucking moonsault, no matter who he does it on. I heard he said the Headhunters were pretty good at catching him, but he always seems to like be a little bit off to the side and never get caught. The same thing you said about when Sandman chucks the ladder from outside the ring to inside the ring and just hits Terry Funk in the head with it. I was like, man, that's rough. And Sandman was reckless and everything and stiff, but when it was his turn to get hit, he took the shots just as hard. I really liked the double pin, only because if Sandman had gotten the pin, it would have been obvious that Funk was winning. And if Funk had pinned Stevie, you would have been pretty sure that Sandman was winning. I like that they both did a double pin, because that way you kind of didn't know how it was going to go. Now, at the time, I feel like you pretty much thought it would be Funk, but I thought Stevie was actually going to be the secondary person if someone else won besides him, because the BWO was pretty popular and Big Stevie Cool was getting a pretty big push, and I thought it might actually be him to pull out the win. And so him, even watching it back, I didn't remember that he got eliminated first, and I was a little bit surprised. But I liked the match a lot. Ladder matches, we've seen so many of them today, but I thought this one was still a lot of fun. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was by a slight margin, the second best match on the show.
Yep, yeah, I gave it 4 stars as well. As we're talking about the whole of the 3-way, both portions with Sandman and Funk as well at the end.
I did the 3-way as like one match, and I did the Funk Raven as a separate match. Just as a 3-way, I gave it 4 stars.
Yeah, I totally agree. 4 stars. It was one of those things where I think what really kind of made the match, as these things often do, is there's that stuff kind of like slightly weird half-assed stuff with like the barbed wire, because I guess it's kind of like one of the things that they can't do much of, and so they do the weird stuff with like the Sandman nails the barbed wire covered leg drop off the top rope and everything, and like this is where Funk starts bleeding. And he bleeds. He does like one of the all-time, like, they save all of the blood in the show. There's no other blood other than the what I think is the accidental blood on Sabu. This is kind of like, they're saving all the blood that they can have from the pay-per-view company. Like, let's have blood in this one match, and it's like, he really bleeds. Like, he literally kind of makes this match and tries to make this show a success with his blood, and from that point on, he's just bleeding so much, and it's just such a great visual. And of course, like, he beats Sandman, but and then Raven comes in and he's fresh, but like, he's so beaten down. It's such a great story. And I really like the angle. I completely forgot about the angle when is it Big Dick Dudley attacks Tommy Dreamer at the in the crow's nest
during the Funk Raven match.
Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, I guess we're on to Funk Raven now. Sorry, did you have anything you wanted to add about the 3-way?
Just like I said, I really liked the match. I will say that I did like Tommy Dreamer on commentary. I thought he did a good job as far as like being cautious about Terry Funk and concerned. I will say that he kind of gave a little bit of a spoiler, I felt, when he was like, I told Terry I would not interfere in this match or the Raven match, which in some ways you could look at like a hypothetical, like I told Terry if he wins, I wouldn't interfere in the Raven match, but it almost seemed like kind of a Freudian slip as well.
Yeah, or like overzealously setting the stage, like try and misdirect, which sometimes makes sense, but in that case, it definitely kind of like sells. Like, I guess it's hard to see it with new eyes, but it does look like they're kind of like going. That is the finish, which makes kind of, it seems like it's coming that Dream is going to get involved somehow. So Raven beats down the Bloody Funk, and basically Reggie Bennett comes in to like no reaction and power bombs, like literally no reaction whatsoever. It's like the opening match on a kind of like 1976 Madison Square Garden card. It's like no reaction at all, and she power bombs Funk, and people are like, what? I guess like a lot of them don't know who she is, or they're not in the mood for that. Like there's that element. They're not in the mood for like a kind of like to taste the possibility of a schmoz ending or a DQ ending or something like that. But yeah, so Raven gets on the mic, calls out Dreamer. Big Dick Dudley attacks Dreamer from behind, but he gets sent through. He very bizarrely takes a choke slam through these stack of tables off the Raven's nest, and what's probably like the single big ECW style crazy table bump of the night. I mean, there's lots of people going through tables on this show, but in terms of something completely, a big dive type thing.
Yeah, the bump that Big Dick Dudley took through the tables looked great. The actual choke slam, not so much. It was like an awkward kind of mistimed thing. And I do remember Dreamer taking that same bump like months earlier, and I would have guessed it was Brian Lee that did it to him, but maybe it was Big Dick Dudley that did it to him. I mean, that's kind of the impression they gave you on commentary. But I remember, for some reason I felt like Brian Lee did that to Dreamer, but maybe not. Yeah. It's kind of fuzzy 24 years later. So yeah, Funk and Raven, it felt like it was kind of anticlimactic, a lot of interference and angles, and I had zero memory of the Reggie Bennett thing, and I wouldn't have recognized her if they hadn't have said who she was. I knew the name, even at the time I knew the name, but meant nothing to me, and it seemed like nobody in the crowd knew who she was. Just kind of a really random choice to have her come out, and I don't know that she was ever seen again.
Yeah, it's again it's a thing which happens a lot in the currently in wrestling, and I guess this is the beginning of it, where you kind of bring someone out, and it's a little bit kind of like you really need to kind of like have a better feel for what the crowd knows. What the crowd knows, and if they're not going to know someone, it's kind of like would have been more effective to say, "Oh, like who is that?" or something. I don't know. So it kind of like, because it just was like a really, really confused, like completely forgotten, as you say. Like I totally forgot like about that happened. That she comes in at the end, and I don't know. Did it go anywhere? Did she even do anything? I can't remember.
I don't recall her doing anything. Like I knew she wrestled for All Japan Women in the early '90s, but as far as ECW, I didn't even remember that she did this. So I definitely don't remember her doing anything else.
I seem to remember something reading in the Torch or something, like 10 years ago, that she has a sandwich shop or something. I think she's dead now. Is she dead now? I don't know.
She's not dead.
Well, that's good. I hope her sandwich shop is going well.
Yeah. Yeah, she's luckily still alive. And now that I said that, I'm gonna second guess myself, but I'm pretty sure she's still alive. Nicole Bass is dead. Maybe that's who you're thinking of.
Yeah, although she was part of the way there, even when she was on our screens in the late 90s.
That's pretty fair.
Formaldehyde and monkey hormones that are going on there, and some kind of
yeah, Nicole Bass. So Funk and Raven, just a lot of distraction. Funk, his selling was good, but there just wasn't a lot of focus on it. It felt, anticlimactic, a lot of interference. I gave it 2.5 stars, but that was more just for the presentation as a whole. Because they really, like I said, there wasn't a lot of focus on just the two of them together. It was like, a bunch of run-ins and then just the climax of the story. But I gave it 2.5 stars, and I remember at the time I really liked the Funk win and the celebration at the end. And the feel didn't quite come across as strongly this time without the music and without watching it in real time. But I largely, enjoyed it. They did fuck up by ringing the bell early when Funk got like his near fall from like I think when Dream. Yeah. So that was unfortunate, but it didn't hurt it terribly. So yeah, I gave it 2.5 stars.
Yeah, I gave it three stars. I guess I'm kind of mentally putting it together with the three-way as a kind of whole segment. I think, as a match itself, it's kind of like when Raven hits the ring, there's like 5 minutes of airtime left or something crazy like that. So it's almost like this is kind of an angle, and also perhaps they're running late a bit or whatever. So they just kind of like don't do much. They go straight to like telling that story. Although I seem to recall Raven beating on him for a little bit longer than that. But I think I'll modify it as a standalone. Yeah, 2.5 stars seems about right. But like, I thought the segment with the blood and the way it went down, even though you're telling, I get they're using it to springboard to Dreamer versus Raven, which makes a lot of sense, and kind of protecting Raven by not having him getting beaten by Funk. But it kind of like the blood and the kind of craziness kind of like does work, and of course both this and the three-way, it's kind of like rough in spots with, as we said, the Reggie Bennett run in and a couple of things which are a little bit kind of tepid or rough. I think like doesn't Stevie in the three-way does the ladder jigsaw swing thing, and like he kind of like barely touches the ladder, and they don't touch the ladder, but everyone bumps off it, and it's kind of like a little bit. And as you can see, this is a crowd that really is deflated by that, by some of that stuff, but in fitting with ECW was quite a bit of kind of reckless sloppiness. But yeah, all in all, like the whole thing, the story that they were trying to tell in the segment of like getting there to this moment where this bloody Funk kind of like gets the pinfall against all odds, it like totally works, and they go off there with like, you know, Funk and Dreamer in the crowd, bloody and Funk all bloody, and yeah, it's a really, really good ending, and
so overall, I thought they kind of hit a home run with their first pay-per-view. I liked pretty much everything on the show except for the Douglas Pitbull match. Some great matches. I thought it had a good, had that great feel-good moment of them finally getting pay-per-view. I loved the Terry Funk title win and the story behind that. And then I thought Sabu and Taz was well done. I loved the Michinoku Pro 6-man and the ladder match. And I thought they kind of hit it out the park, really.
Sorry, I lost you for a second. I lost you for like 30 seconds. I don't know what happened. I thought this was like definitely, as an overall show, it has to be considered like a home run. There were a lot of really good matches. I said you start to see through some aspects of what brought ECW to the dance, with kind of like, you know, that Shane Douglas Pitbull match. But like, yeah, a lot of good matches, a great showcase for anything, and anyone that watched, it would have been by the standards of the time like a kind of, they clearly differentiated themselves and delivered like some, good matches and variety and kind of, and blood and stuff that they weren't getting a lot in the major promotions. Although, the time frame of this is really interesting, because we talk about like Taka Michinoku going to the WWF shortly after, and this is like right around the time. And I think this is one thing that really does affect ECW badly, which is when is WWE with the biggest star of Austin really go into this, doing this R-rated thing, because it makes ECW kind of look like, even by say within the year from this point, ECW is kind of like, the only thing we can do to differentiate ourselves from that is like, a handful of stars and doing these like matches with all the like crazy moves and everything. And like as a kind of like culture surrounding the creative aspect of the company, they were kind of like had their legs cut off a little bit, because they weren't, because in some ways, like, because the WWF did all of that stuff, in terms of doing this R-rated stuff, but they kind of did it with like really, really well, with two really good angles, like with the kind of like the Bret Hart Breaking Bad thing, Bret Hart Hill kind of Breaking Bad thing, and then Steve Austin and Austin with Tyson and Austin McMahon, and kind of like you had Funk and Cactus Jack doing enough of the hardcore wrestling type stuff, and the chair shots becoming like an almost standard transitional move on Monday Night Raw about a year after this, with the like lots of chair shots everywhere, almost like the suplexes in matches or something. But yeah, this time capsule, this is kind of like the sweet spot where ECW is able to make a name for themselves, really make a name for themselves on pay-per-view. And like, they finally, by the end, the last year of the company, they really, really kind of like worked all this stuff out, and they got really, really good on pay-per-view. I thought that they were mostly through kind of 97, 98. They were kind of like a little bit spotty. You had Heatwave 98 was good, but like they really kind of like worked it out, ironically, in like the last year and a half. But yeah, it was great to go revisit and watch this as kind of like a historical show. Again, the closest modern equivalent would be something like the first All in Chicago. Definite thumbs up from me.
Yeah, so that's 2 thumbs up for sure, and I had fun rewatching it, like I said. So everybody, thanks for tuning in. That's our thoughts on ECW Barely Legal. If you agree, disagree, feel free to chime in the comments and let us know what your thoughts are. So until next time, make sure you tune in to the Read This podcast. And thank you, Michael, for being my guest today.
No problem, Shannon, and keep on smashing those bullies and being an excellent emergent podcaster with people like the great Graham Corton on your show and like a Brutal Bob, etc.
Thank you very much. I'll talk to you later, buddy.